So for the next couple episodes, we're going to do some world building stuff. So to start off with that, how much world building do you need?
Well, that's a great question, right? So, and I think when more unseasoned or when you're first getting started, D&D players start, and when I first started playing, I was the same way. You create these backstories going back, 1,500 years of stuff that never really actually matters to the world your players are playing in.
I think the problem is D&D was heavily inspired by The Lord of the Rings.
Oh my God, yeah.
Which
go read the Silmarillion.
Nobody has 20, 30 years of lore to build like Tolkien did.
And specifically, if you're only going to be playing this world for maybe a year or two, maybe 3 or 4 years, is it really worth it to spend that much time on a backstory?
Even for 10 to 20 years, is it worth it?
Well, it may be worth it for 10 to 20 because you could start exploring some of those concepts. But to begin with, I wouldn't even begin, if I was going to know I was going to play a game for 20 years, which I don't think I would ever begin knowing I'm going to play for 20 years.
Yeah.
But if I was going to, even if I knew that, I said, okay, this is the last D&D game I'm going to play, and we're going to play this thing until I'm, 65 years of age or whatever, I would look at this and still not create a backstory that was Tolkien-esque.
Yeah.
I would create enough of a backstory for the kingdoms and the people that I need to have involved for the story that I'd like to tell. If you actually want to see more about that, go to our description, and there's actually a course we have that's called Just Enough Planning. And in there you can pick it up and you can see exactly an entire way of planning your entire RPG out. If you don't want to pick up the online course, we actually have a book that is pretty much all the principles of Just Enough Planning, and I'll also link that down in the description as well. Now, moving forward, what I would do is I would have all of the main characters, all of the main storylines I kind of want to deal with somewhere in my head, preferably outwritten on paper, so that I could start tying them all back. But I'm not going to come up with what happened to them when they were 5, unless it was really absolutely critical for some sort of hook or some sort of reveal, some sort of surprise to the players. Where it's like, oh, I revealed that this person is actually evil because this thing that happened when they were 5.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't really necessarily care. And that's, I think, the whole point is I don't think you should get locked up into figuring out, the entire history of the elven race, the entire history of the Treants, the entire history of the orcs, the entire history of the trolls, the entire history of the gods.
Unless you're playing one of the histories.
If you're going to play a history, then you should play the history.
Yes.
And so if you're going to play the elven history, then play the elven history.
And only write enough to do the elven history. You don't need all of the orcs history for the elven. You just need when the orcs cross the elven history, do the orcs.
And that could be really fun, though, where it's so if some of the orcs were actually twisted fallen elves, for instance, which is a Silmarillion, by the way, then what you would have then is you would have a scene where those elves are taken. And then you fast forward because of the, if you're doing, again, Lord of the Rings, you have this huge long lifespan where you could come back around where now those things are now fighting you. And you realize, oh, these are these huge weird captains of these things are amazing. What are they? And you start realizing, wait a minute, I think that looks a little bit like some of these elves that were taken at that battle we were at 100 years ago. So you could start doing some of those cool reveals. But again, you're not having to detail out their entire backstory. You just might need a name or two, for that. So at the end of the day, I would highly recommend not spending, if I was going to do a timeline on it, a time limit, I would spend maybe 6 hours tops creating my entire backstory of the world. I would honestly probably spend less than that. I'd probably just get a concept and then just grab some names, grab some kingdom names, fill in some backstory, and just make sure that I have enough to tie everything together. And then as we would go through week after week after week, then I would start basically maybe giving 30 minutes or so to get more backstory to make it make sense.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't see that you should do what I've seen some DMs do, where they write literally a 30-page book based on the last 1,500 years of the history that only they see. And it's really, really cool, but no one ever gets to see it because your players basically want to screw around in a tavern half the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just, it's just what happens. Why waste a bunch of your time unless your players want to pursue it? If they want to pursue it, start building the backstory.
This is why you have a lot of GM burnout, because they drop a lot of time and effort for it not to be
utilized. Right, exactly.
And part of that's where the players want to go, but part of that is also, as a GM, where your players want to go.
Yeah.
Don't drop the time in that if it's never going to be used.
Right. And so if you start seeing where your player, like say your players are really interested in one aspect of your world, cool, start building that for them. But don't worry about, like let's say they're really interested in the economic part of your world. Well, unless it needs to cross paths with political or religious or mythology or deep dive history.
Don't build the rest.
There's no reason to build it. Just build anything that tangentially touches it.
Yes.
But just enough for them to realize, oh, got it. So the economics are tied to this political system. That's interesting to know. Don't care.
Because they would go into the political if they wanted to.
And if they do, then
you can build it then.
Build that way. Yeah, exactly. So with that, we'll let you go, and we'll see you next time.